A rusting ship, half buried in sand. Then another, and another. A whole fleet, stranded in an endless desert, miles from the nearest drop of water. But these ships were never dragged here. They are sitting exactly where they always sat. Because once, this desert was a sea. One of the largest lakes on the entire planet, teeming with life, teeming with fish. 40,000 people lived along its shores, and then, within a single human lifetime, it vanished. Not from drought, not from any act of nature. The sea did not simply die, it was taken. This is the story of how the world drained an entire sea and what it left behind. Long before the desert, there was a sea. It lay deep in the heart of Central Asia, between two deserts. The Aral Sea, one of the largest lakes on the entire planet. It was fed by two great rivers born in mountains far away, the Amu Darya and the Sir Darya. For thousands of years, they carried meltwater across the desert and poured it into the sea. And the sea gave life in return. Its waters were thick with fish, carp, bream, pike, and sturgeon. Along its shores, whole towns grew up around the water. In the south, a fishing town called Moynak. In the north, a busy port named Aralsk. Tens of thousands of people lived beside the sea, and nearly all of them lived by one thing: fishing. At dawn, the fleets set out across the open water. Wooden trawlers, their nets heavy with the morning catch. The boats came home sitting low in the water, full to the deck. On the docks, the fish were unloaded by the ton. Canneries ran day and night, packing the catch for the whole country. The Aral fed cities thousands of miles away. It was a world of water in the middle of a desert. In summer, children swam off the piers. Steamers carried passengers from one shore to the other. There were beaches, resorts, holidaymakers in the sun. It seemed impossible that any of it could ever end. The sea had been there since before memory. Generation after generation, it had always provided. The people of the Aral could not imagine a life without it. But far away in distant offices, a decision was forming. A plan that had nothing to do with fish or boats or the sea. And it would drain their world to the very last drop. The decision came from far away, from Moscow. The Soviet Union wanted to dominate the world in cotton. And cotton demands one thing above all else: water. The planners looked at the map of Central Asia. They saw two great rivers emptying into a sea, and where others saw a sea, they saw waste. Every drop that reached the Aral, they believed, was a drop thrown away. Why feed a sea when you could feed a crop? So they began to dig. Across the desert, armies of workers carved out canals. Thousands of miles of channels branching off the two rivers. The water was pulled away from the sea and sent to the fields, and the desert bloomed white. Cotton. They called it white gold. These fields became some of the largest cotton lands on Earth. They stretched row after row to the horizon. But the canals were crude, cut straight into bare sand. Much of the water never reached the cotton at all. It simply sank into the desert or vanished into the air. So to grow the crop, they took more water, and more. The two rivers that fed the sea began to shrink, and then one of them stopped reaching the sea entirely. The scientists knew exactly what this would do. They had run the numbers. They knew the sea would fall, and they decided it was a price worth paying. A sea was expendable, they reasoned. Cotton was not. At first, the change was too slow to even see. The shoreline slipped back, only a few feet each year. The fishermen noticed their nets coming up lighter. The water began to taste of salt. Something was wrong with the sea. And by the time the world understood, it was already too late. At first, the sea fell slowly, a few feet of shoreline each year, then more. Then the water began to race away from the land. Year by year, the sea pulled back across the desert. The shore retreated, 1 mile, then 10, then dozens. And as the water shrank, what it left behind grew deadlier. With less water, the salt had nowhere to go. The sea grew saltier and saltier still, until almost nothing could live in it. The fish that had fed a nation began to die. Species after species vanished from the water. The great catches dwindled to nothing. In the fishing towns, the boats came back empty. Then they stopped going out at all. The canneries fell silent. Thousands of fishermen had nothing left to fish. And still the sea kept retreating, faster every year. Soon the water was too far away to even see. Moynak had been built right on the shore. Now the sea was tens of miles away. Its harbor became a basin of dry, cracked mud. And the fishing fleet was left where it sat. Great steel ships, marooned on the sand, rusting in a desert that had once been a seabed. The people who could leave, left. Towns that had thrived for generations emptied out. Whole communities became ghost towns. And those who stayed faced a land turning against them. The sea that had given them everything was gone. In its place rose a new desert, with a new name. They called it the Aralkum, the Aral Sands. A desert that had not existed within living memory, born from the bed of a dying sea. But the vanished water was not the worst of it, because the seabed it left behind was poisoned. And soon, the wind would carry that poison to everyone. For decades, the rivers had carried more than water to the sea. They carried the runoff from the cotton fields, fertilizers, pesticides, toxic chemicals. All of it settled, year after year, into the bed of the sea. Now that seabed lay bare and dry, and the wind took all of it. Storms lifted the dried seabed high into the sky. Clouds of salt and poison miles across. Toxic dust storms swept over the land. They carried for hundreds of miles in every direction. The salt fell on the fields and poisoned the soil. It settled over the towns and coated everything, and the people breathed it in every single day. The region became one of the sickest on earth. Cancer and lung disease climbed without end. The little water that remained was unsafe to drink, and the children suffered most of all. Infant deaths rose to among the highest anywhere on the planet. The dying sea was now killing the living. But the seabed still hid one last secret. Far out in the sea, there had been an island. A secret island, left off the maps. On it, the Soviet Union had built a hidden laboratory. Its purpose? Biological weapons. Anthrax, plague, smallpox, tested in the open air on an island in the middle of the sea. As long as it was an island, its dangers were trapped. But the sea was disappearing, and as the water fell, the island grew, until the day the water vanished completely, and the island became part of the mainland. What the sea had sealed away was now joined to the world by open land. The lab had been abandoned in haste, its dangers left buried. The sea had been a prison, and the prison had opened. A poisoned land, a buried secret, a sea all but gone. But its story was not quite over. For decades, the Aral Sea had only one direction: down. Every map, every photograph told the same story of loss. The world had written it off as the worst man-made disaster of its age. But in the far north of the sea, a different story was about to begin. Here, one river still reached the water, the Sir Darya. It carried just enough flow to keep a small northern basin alive. If that water could be held, not lost south into the desert, the north might survive. In 2005, with the World Bank, Kazakhstan made its move. They built a wall across the sea. A 13-kilometer dike of earth and concrete, the Kok-Aral Dam. Its purpose was simple: trap the river's water in the north, stop it from bleeding away into the dead southern basin. And then, they waited. What happened next, almost no one had dared to predict. The water began to rise. Not in decades, in months. The North Aral climbed back, meter by meter. The shoreline that had fled for miles began to return. Water crept back toward towns that had been left in the dust. As the sea refilled, the salt that had killed it diluted away. The water grew fresher, fresh enough for life to come back. Fish were released into the recovering sea, and they survived. Then they multiplied. Species thought gone from these waters returned. Where the nets had come back empty, they came back full. The fishing boats that had rotted on dry sand floated again. In the town of Aralsk, the canneries reopened their doors. Families that had fled for a generation began to come home. The catch that had fallen to nothing climbed back into the thousands of tons. The air grew cooler. Rain returned to a land that had baked for years. It was not a miracle. It was a wall, a river, and patience. But the victory was only half a victory. To the south, the larger sea was beyond saving. The rivers no longer reached it. That vast basin remains a desert, and likely always will. The Aral Sea will never again be what it was. But in the north, against every prediction, a sea that died is alive again.